Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. 10 people have died when a suspected shooter opened fire at a southeast Austrian school. Graz Mayor Elke Kahar confirmed several students and one adult among the dead as police locked down the city. Climate activist Greta Thunberg is deported from Israel and flies to France after the Navy blocks her and others from sailing to Gaza, aiming to deliver aid and raise awareness. Other pro-Palestinian activists fight deportation as they push for humanitarian support. Washington and Beijing gather in London for day 2 of high-stakes talks to cool a heated tariff war. US Treasury spokesman says negotiators resumed this morning, hinting both sides still want a badly needed deal. A 31-year-old teaching assistant is fatally stabbed outside a school in eastern France by a pupil during a bag search and dies due to injuries. President Macron denounces a senseless wave of violence and promises the government's action to reduce crime. Israel issues evacuation warnings for several areas of northern Gaza amid escalating violence in the region. This comes after local health authorities report 17 people are killed after the IDF opened fire on a group of Palestinians near an aid point in the same region. Moscow launches one of its largest air strikes on Kyiv in over 3 years of war and struck a maternity ward in the southern city of Odessa, killing 3. The strikes come in retaliation from Russia after multiple Ukrainian attacks deep within Russian territory. The Trump administration orders US Marines into Los Angeles and intensifies raids on suspected undocumented immigrants, fueling more outrage from protesters. Some 700 Marines based in Southern California are deployed as part of a federal strategy to quell street demonstrators. Iranian lawmakers say that the US and Israel are seeking to turn nuclear talks into a strategic trap for Iran. This comes just days before a planned 6th round of Iran-US nuclear talks in Oman. We start in Europe now, where Russia launched another prolonged drone attack on Ukraine in the early hours of June the 10th, killing 2 people in Odessa and damaging swathes of Kyiv, as well as striking a maternity ward in the southern port of Odessa, according to regional officials. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged Kyiv's Western allies to respond with concrete action. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha also called for immediate new sanctions and air defense systems. Here's what the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry spokesperson said.
Андрій Сибіга опублікував свій заклик до міжнародної спільноти в зв'язку з цими варварськими ударами. Насамперед, заклик дуже простий – посилювати тиск, санкційний тиск на Росію вже зараз, нічого не чекати, немає вже часу для будь-яких зволікань, необхідно вводити нові, сильні санкційні пакети, європейські, американські, тиснути всім гуртом на Москву, бо без цього тиску вона, очевидно, не збирається обирати мир, а лише продовжувати.
The overnight strikes came as Russia's biggest drone assault on Ukraine on June the 9th, which is part of stepped-up operations that Moscow said are retaliatory measures for Kyiv's recent attacks on Russian air bases and bridges. At least 4 people were hospitalized in Kyiv as a result of the hours-long attacks that hit 7 of the city's 10 districts, according to city officials. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia had fired 315 drones across the country, of which 277 were downed. All 7 missiles launched by Russia were also brought down. Moreover, the Russian Defense Ministry has said that it carried out the strikes on military targets in Kyiv with high-precision weapons. Russia's Defense Ministry has said that it intercepted or destroyed 102 Ukrainian drones overnight across various regions in Russia. Russia's transport agency, Rosa Viatsia, also said that flight operations had been temporarily restricted at more than a dozen Russian airports. In the city of Belgorod, Russian emergency services said one person was killed in a Ukrainian drone attack on a petrol station. We're now joined by our guest today, Professor Veselin Popovsky, Professor and Vice Dean of Jindal Global Law School in New Delhi, India. Thank you very much, Professor Popovsky, for joining us on the program. First of all, these strikes coming from both sides.
I spent my life abroad most of the time. I was in New York, by the way. I worked for the United
strikes
Nations.
from both sides. I believe we're having some
London.
technical issues here. Professor Popovsky, are you aware that... Okay, we move on. Over
Life after
to the Middle
I was a
East.
Bulgarian diplomat.
We have some breaking news coming in now, where Britain will join Canada, Australia, New Zealand and others to slap sanctions on two far-right Israeli ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, over their role in the Gaza conflict, as according to a report by the Times of London. The sanctions include asset freezes and travel bans and will be implemented in coordination with Canada, Australia, New Zealand and other partners. Ben-Gvir, Israel's national security minister, is a West Bank settler, while Smotrich serves as the country's finance minister. The move is part of growing international pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government to lift the blockade on humanitarian aid into Gaza, where experts warn that famine is looming. We're now joined by Professor Popovsky to discuss further on the Russia-Ukraine war. Professor Popovsky, thank you very much for joining us on the program. We're seeing this war escalate every single day, more drone strikes on either side. Every day it seems like we see the biggest drone barrage since the war began, as a headline. What are your thoughts on what's currently going on the battlefield? Obviously, Russia is claiming retaliation due to Operation Spider's Web, which happened a few days ago. What are your views on the current state of the battlefield in the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Indeed, it's very nasty what Russia does. It's not retaliatory. They started the war 3 years and 4 months ago. It is a Russian aggression against Ukraine and Russian refusal to accept a ceasefire. There won't be any airplanes hit by Ukrainians if Russia did accept a ceasefire, at least the minimal 30-day ceasefire, which everybody, United States, European allies, Ukraine, expected Russia to agree on a ceasefire. Russia disregarded that. They continue bombing cities. It's mostly they bomb cities. They have no other options left there apart from killing civilians. It's very clear that Russia is the aggressor. Russia commits war crimes every day, especially the last days. And they don't negotiate. They don't agree on ceasefire. They simply continue to fight. It seems that for Russia, this war is the only option, and they are not giving up. The response should be very strong from everywhere, from the Europeans, from everybody. Everybody in the world, including in the global south, should do the same. Sanctions on Russia, support for Ukraine, no negotiations with Putin. 3 very clear messages to everybody in the world.
Yes, and Dr. Popovsky, we're seeing Ukraine still call for further sanctions against Russia. Are sanctions really an effective means of countering Moscow at this point of the war? Are they going to be an effective move against Moscow?
Sanctions are effective if they are global. Remember when Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, United Nations imposed sanctions on every single import or export on Iraq. And it did work. Iraq couldn't develop weapons of mass destruction for the next 12 years. Iraq was disarmed by the sanctions of the United Nations. The problem is exactly that the sanctions on Russia are not universal. Big countries in the south do not care about those sanctions. They continue to buy oil and gas from Russia, effectively making sanctions useless, exactly because Russia still can export oil and gas. If every country in the world impose sanctions on Russia, they will be very effective. Putin has no other option to get any money out of anything else apart from oil, gas, and some resources he exports. So it's really, sanctions will be effective exactly when every country in the world imposes them. And that's where they work. Otherwise, if only Europeans and Americans and a few other countries, Japan, North Korea, Australia, impose sanctions, and it's kind of very cynical to say European sanctions do not work from countries in the global south who support Putin with their trade. Simple.
Yes, and finally, Dr. Popovsky, we've obviously seen both sides escalate their conflict. We did see Operation Spider's Web as well occur just a week or so ago. What does that say? What does it say about Ukrainian military capabilities? We continue to see Ukraine strike within Russian territory. What are your thoughts?
Yes, Ukraine did what is a masterpiece. It will be studied in the future military manuals in the next century, what Ukraine did on the 1st of June, hitting all four big airspaces which contain 41 destroyed ballistic long-term delivery system, and it's very significant. It's a quarter of the Russian long-term strategic missiles delivery system. So it's a very huge success in terms of military capability of Russia being destroyed with a single day hit on the 1st of June. Ukraine can do more of this, obviously. You see, they are not much in the news, but Ukrainians did hit later several other military objects in the Russian Federation, and they will continue destroying, for example, Iskander, the missiles depot in Bryansk. They destroyed some military equipment in a train, hitting a train. And daily, by the way, Ukrainian drones hit military targets. That's the difference. Russia bombs civilian targets, big cities. Ukrainian destroy only military target. In that 1st of June hit of the airplanes, there was no single civilian casualty. Ukrainians do follow the rules of war, the Geneva Conventions, and Russia, exactly in the opposite way, targets only civilian objects and tries to get some benefit out of this. And unfortunately, Donald Trump administration still is hesitant and doesn't offer full support for Ukraine and doesn't impose massive sanctions on Russian Federation. So there is still a lot to do. As I mentioned, sanctions on Russia, support for Ukraine, no negotiations with Putin. Those three are necessary for this tragedy to end.
Yes. Dr. Veselin Popovsky, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. We now move over to the Middle East now, where in the latest developments in the Israel-Hamas conflict, France's foreign minister has confirmed that 4 French activists have refused deportation after the interception of a Gaza-bound aid boat. The Israeli Navy stopped the Madeleine, an aid ship operated by the Freedom Flotilla coalition, while it was in international waters. Listen in to the French foreign minister.
À ce jour, 2 d'entre eux ont accepté de signer les papiers les expulsant du territoire israélien et leur permettant de rentrer dans notre pays. 4 l'ont refusé à ce jour. Nous restons présents, puisque cette présence consulaire fait partie des missions du ministère des Affaires étrangères et elle s'applique à toutes et tous, quelles que soient leurs opinions politiques, et que l'on les approuve ou qu'on...
The vessel, which was carrying humanitarian supplies and 12 international activists from France, Germany, Brazil, Turkey, Sweden, Spain and the Netherlands, was escorted to the Israeli port of Ashdod. According to French authorities, 5 French nationals who declined to leave Israel voluntarily have been detained and transferred to Ben Gurion Airport, where a judge will assess their cases. Meanwhile, Israel's navy has carried out strikes on Houthi targets at the Red Sea of Port Houthi in Yemen. The Israeli military says the strikes targeted locations used for weapons transfers by the Iran-backed group. Houthi-run media reported 2 strikes on the port's docks. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has warned that a naval and aerial blockade could follow if such attacks continue. There are no confirmed casualties so far, however. And lastly, in central Gaza, at least 17 people were killed and dozens were injured when Israeli forces opened fire near an aid distribution point. Local health authorities say large crowds of displaced civilians had gathered to receive aid. The injured were taken to hospitals in Nuseirat and Gaza City. The Israeli military has announced an investigation. Last week, authorities declared routes to US-supported aid centres as closed military zones during the night hours. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has not yet commented on the situation. We're now joined by Jordan Cope, who is a Middle East expert, and he is located in Erfurt, Germany. Thank you very much, Jordan, for joining us on the programme. Jordan, we've seen more reports of firing by Israeli forces on Palestinian civilians attempting to get aid. This information is obviously coming out of Gaza, but this is a repeated claim that people are making that this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is proving dangerous to civilians, and Israeli military are firing on people trying to get aid. What are your thoughts on this seemingly repeated situation that is occurring when the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is involved?
It's important to understand where this rumor is coming from. You mentioned health authorities. Those health authorities are from Hamas. Hamas is ultimately the one cultivating these myths in an effort to undermine Israel as it continues to gain more and more control over the Gaza Strip, which Hamas really realizes that it is losing quicker and quicker. What we are seeing right now in the Gaza Strip is the arising of some militia groups, such as the Abu Shabaab group, which are now seeking to oust Hamas from the Gaza Strip. Regarding your claim that 17 people were killed, the IDF has denied any possible involvement, even if this event occurred, as Hamas is claiming. It's possible, though, that the Abu Shabaab militia was actually responsible, perhaps, for some of those deaths. The IDF response so far has been that it shot some warning shots when its soldiers were being approached by some suspicious figures. But according to the IDF, there is no knowledge yet that it had any involvement whatsoever in these so-called 17 deaths. There have been several rumors now about the Humanitarian Foundation and its efforts to provide meals, hundreds of thousands of meals, one might add. Recently, Israel was also accused of just simply shutting down the distribution of food, and it was later found out that it wasn't Israel that ultimately caused the Humanitarian Foundation to temporarily suspend operations in Tel al-Sultan. Rather, it was a result of Hamas issuing direct threats and threatening the volunteers on the ground.
Jordan, there's been 127 people reportedly killed trying to get aid since the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or the GHF, started their operations in the space of 2 weeks. Are you saying that all of this information is false? And does the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation not have the responsibility of keeping those people safe that are trying to get aid, since that Israel is not letting established humanitarian foundations like the United Nations distribute aid like it previously did, which appeared to be not as incident prone, let's say?
That's blatantly untrue that the international community did not cause deaths when distributing aid. Distributing aid is actually a very dangerous operation because of stampedes that can occur, because of shooting and looting that can occur, which has definitely happened throughout this war. Hamas has seized so much of the aid throughout this war and has tried to monopolize it in order to continue to sustain itself throughout this war. Approximately 60% of all aid going into Rafah at one point was being seized by Hamas. And even recent aid has been seen to have been seized by Hamas and aid convoys surrounded by Hamas members with guns. Even when Jordan and other countries were giving air deliveries to the Gaza Strip, some of the umbrellas on the aid did not expand, and it ultimately landed on civilians, killing them. So the fact that there is no humanitarian aid in Gaza, that was once a myth. There's been so many myths about humanitarian aid in Gaza right now throughout the entirety of the war, because Hamas ultimately wants to perpetuate the myths that I'm currently hearing right now.
Jordan, these visuals of and interviews of people in the Gaza Strip, of people trying to get aid, going to these checkpoints and being greeted with stampedes, Israeli warning shots, as you've said. These are first-hand accounts that have been reported on, and visuals state for themselves. It seems like chaos. No, this does not seem like a well-ordered operation at all. That's what critics would say.
Unfortunately, this is no university cafeteria. This is a war zone, and the IDF has done a tremendous effort to make sure that humanitarian aid gets into the Gaza Strip. Whether it gets into the right hands is a more complicated matter. But as the former Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, recently noted, 1.7 million tons of aid have entered the Gaza Strip since the beginning of the war. And as a matter of fact, according to him,
Apologies, Jordan. Apologies, Jordan. We do have to move on. We're running out of time on this topic. I just want to ask about these sanctions that are getting imposed on two far-right Israeli ministers. You have Ben-Gvir and Smotrich over their role in the Gaza conflict. They will be having sanctions imposed on them by Britain, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, among others. These are staunch Israeli allies traditionally. What are your views on the heightening allied criticism for Israel, particularly for the war in Gaza and the West and the settlements in the West Bank?
First, regarding your phrase, the ministers, quote unquote, you have, they're not my ministers. I'm not an Israeli citizen. I will say that Britain is particularly weak, though, when it comes to morality right now. Britain has ultimately decided at a time when it became clear that Iran has been testing relevant tests to conduct nuclear weapons, decides to sanction Israel. The comments of these ministers, however unsavory they might be, do not actually lead to any action item responses. It's very concerning why Britain still has relations with Iran at this time and isn't sanctioning Iran enough. Regarding presence of Israelis in the West Bank, I will like to add that it would be a travesty to describe and to condemn people indigenous to the land living in their historic homeland as somebody that is not indigenous, to try to portray them as somebody foreign, as a colonizer. To do so to Indians in Kashmir would be equally insulting, and I advise the channel to consider how it discusses Jews living in an area where they should be allowed to live.
Okay, Jordan, the settlements are internationally known as illegal settlements. The Palestinian territories were assigned after the war in 1967. What are your thoughts on them being viewed as illegal by the international community?
Just going on the second story.
First and foremost, there is tremendous bias within the United Nations to begin with. Over 50% of all General Assembly resolutions have been against Israel, as have approximately over 50% of all Human Rights Council resolutions against Israel. The United Nations is a function of politics, of alternative interest, and what the Geneva Conventions actually say about settlements are they are only illegal if a country that is occupying another country's land forcefully transfers their citizens into that territory. There has never been a Palestinian state that has been created. There have been agreements that have helped try to create the opportunity for a future of a Palestinian state, but the argument falls flat on its head despite alternative politics and political agendas. Jewish presence in the West Bank, even though it is banned by the Palestinian Authority by threat of death penalty, is not illegal under international law if you actually consider the proper tenets of international law themselves.
Okay, Greta Thunberg has accused Israel of kidnapping and the other activists in international waters after the aid boat was intercepted. What are your thoughts on that accusation of kidnapping after the boat was intercepted in international waters?
I'm sorry, Pratik.
I think Greta Thunberg is a hypocrite of the highest order. She's an environmental activist who's now flying back on a jet all the way home, and on top of that, having been on a yacht in an entirely unenvironmentally friendly operation. She had made her intent clear to break the law. She was properly arrested and detained, and to her luck, she has actually been sent back to the European Union despite and not being tried and detained on Israeli territory. She got away lucky with it this time. She should stick to environmental activism and keep her hands out of the Middle East. But if she is going to get more involved in environmental activism, maybe she needs to wash her hands after being part of a flotilla that was caught throwing its phones in the water as they were being detained.
Jordan Cope, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. We now move over to Europe, where a deadly school attack has shaken the city of Graz in Austria. At least 10 people have been killed and several others injured after a gunman opened fire at a secondary school in the city of Graz. Authorities say the suspect, believed to be a 22-year-old former student, was found dead, reportedly with a pistol and a shotgun. Mayor Elke Kahar described the attack as a terrible tragedy. The school has been evacuated and police have secured the area. Austria's foreign minister called the incident unbearable, while EU officials stressed that children must feel safe in schools. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has also offered his condolences and called the incident horrific. With one of Europe's most armed civilian populations, Austria has seen shootings before, including the 2020 Vienna terror attack. An investigation is underway. For now, police believe the attacker acted alone. We're now joined by Ambassador Suresh Goel, a former diplomat located in New Delhi, to discuss this further. Ambassador Goel, a tragic day for Austria. What are your thoughts on this tragedy, and how can something happen in Europe, in a school in Europe? We usually these sort of events are usually mainly in the USA, but how can things be done to prevent this? What kind of actions should the Austrian government now take?
Thank you very much, Thomas. I'm afraid I will be leaving in just a minute's time, and therefore I'll make my remark very, very quick. It's rather sad as to what happened in Graz, and this shouldn't have happened in any stable, peaceful, and civilized environment. But it has happened, clearly indicating that there was some factor, something happened to trigger that kind of violence on. Since we do not know all the facts, therefore I would be very reluctant to make any remark, with the exception of saying that yes, I have been to Australia and Switzerland and the places like this in Europe. One hardly expects this kind of violence to take place anywhere. However, we do notice that all over the world, whether it is Europe, USA, many places, these kind of incidents are increasing by the day, indicating clearly that a social instability is creeping in, could be a result of economies, social factors, we do not know, or even politics really. But we need to really wait till we find out more and then make a judgment call. But all I can say is very sad, and condolences to the families of those who have passed away in that tragic incident. And thank you very much. Now, I do need to leave. Thank you.
Ambassador Suresh Goel, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Well, that is all we have time for, and we will continue to bring you more news updates from across the world. Thank you.